Hi, everyone. I'm glad you're here because today's episode is a doozy. Today, I have three stories that nearly shattered everyone involved as they tried to rationalize what happened to them. Just wait until you hear what you're about to hear. So, if you're enjoying the channel, don't be invisible. Let us know you're out there and smash that subscribe button so we can always be together. Thanks. Now, let's get into the stories. I was a college student studying abroad in a small village in the gorgeous mountains of Ireland. It was a beautiful, quaint little town with an old castle and a small market square where locals would gather to buy and sell their goods. The villagers were friendly, and I quickly made friends with a group of students who were also studying abroad. But things started to take a strange turn when we began to hear strange noises coming from the castle at night. It started with just a few whispers here and there, but soon the whispers turned into wails and screams. It freaked us out, and as foolish as it now sounds, we decided we had to go and check things out. I was a curious student with a love for adventure, still do love to be adventurous, but I've wisened up a little in my old age. I was always fascinated by the paranormal and the unexplained, and I saw this as an opportunity to investigate something that could potentially be supernatural. My friends were just as curious as I was, and we all agreed that we had to find out what was really happening in that castle. Our first sighting of something truly strange was when we all saw a shadowy figure passing by the windows. We were all terrified, but at the same time, it was absolutely thrilling. We were all into ghost shows and paranormal investigations and all that stuff. This was an opportunity to do the investigating ourselves. We were so excited. We decided to investigate the next day, but we found nothing out of the ordinary. Over the next few nights, we continued to hear strange noises coming from the castle, but we didn't see anything and we couldn't capture any evidence. It wasn't until one night when we were exploring the castle grounds that we found an old, hidden passage that led deep into the castle. We knew we had to explore it. As we made our way through the passage, we saw strange symbols and markings on the walls, and all of us felt uneasy, and I was nauseous. There was truly something unnerving about this passageway, and then we all heard strange whispers and voices that seemed to be coming from nowhere. It was horrifying, and a couple of my friends ran back screaming. They couldn't handle it, but the rest of us pushed on. And then we heard this loud, piercing scream that made us all scream in terror. We booked it out of there, screaming, crying, yelling. There was a door at the end of the passage that we almost made it to, but it was clear that something didn't want us in there. We all made it out without a hitch, and a few days later, we met a local historian at a pub who told us that the castle had a dark history of witchcraft and the occult. He warned us to stay away, but we had already gotten so far, and we couldn't help wondering what could possibly be in that door. So the next night, we made our way back down the passage, pretty much trembling and tiptoeing the whole way down. We opened up the door, and it led us to a round room with an altar in the middle, with melted candles all over the place. There were old knives and swords and creepy symbols all over the walls, and a big pentagram was painted red on the floor. One of my friends had the idea to light the candles and then try to communicate with whatever forces were haunting the castle. In hindsight, we were asking for it, big time. But at the time, it was just part of an exciting adventure into the unknown, and we were all changed people when we returned from it. Anyway, we lit the candles and started asking stupid questions like, "Is anybody here? What do you want from us? Why haven't you moved on?" None of us really knew what we were doing, but there was so much activity in that castle that we knew something was bound to happen. Just when we were about to call it quits because nothing was transpiring, all of the candles went out at once, and the door slammed shut. We piled over to the door, but we realized it was locked, and now we were panicked. We eventually lit the candles back up and tried to come up with some sort of a game plan to get the door back open. So then suddenly we noticed this thick, black, shadowy smoke that was swirling around the room. The smoke got denser and denser, and eventually formed into a figure above the altar. The figure let out this deep, horrible growl that I could only describe as demonic, and it seemed to be coming from multiple sources, and it got louder and louder. Finally, one of my friends kicked the door down, and we all clambered out of there and never went back. None of us slept that night, and we sat around profusely researching everything we could find about that castle. We eventually found out that the castle had a long history of occult witchcraft, and there was supposedly a shadow demon that had been summoned by witches to do their bidding. I cannot stress enough how lucky I feel that we all are to be alive after that encounter with the shadow demon. It was an experience that changed our lives forever. Looking back, we were so foolish to even attempt to investigate the paranormal without any proper knowledge or experience. We were lucky that we didn't get hurt or have our souls possessed by the forces that we were dealing with. The experience taught me the importance of respecting the forces that we cannot see or comprehend. I still have a fascination with the occult and witchcraft and the supernatural in general, but now I approach it with respect, knowledge, preparation, and caution. I've realized that there's so much out there that we cannot fully understand or control, and that's why it's so important to spend our energy on what we can control. The experience also taught me that there are dark forces out there that are constantly trying to affect us in negative ways. It's up to us to use our God-given powers for good and to defeat those forces. We have the power to create positive change and to protect ourselves and those around us from the negative forces that exist in the world. It's a responsibility that I feel we all have, and I think it's important that we take it seriously. I grew up hunting with my dad. We would mostly do small game like rabbits and pheasants and such. It was a real bonding activity for us. So when I was in college in South Dakota and away from home, I would go out sometimes on my breaks and try to rekindle that feeling. I think I was pretty homesick during that first year of school. I also liked to hunt in some pretty remote areas. The place where this happened was somewhere I wasn't very familiar with, and it was quite a distance from where I had to park. I don't remember exactly how I found it. In those days, I really enjoyed finding places that were unpopulated as possible. The walk to where I wanted to go was a few miles from where I parked my truck. I started out a little after noon and figured I would hunt until dark and then come back out. I had my retriever Barney with me. The walk-in was a path that followed an abandoned farm road. It took us through some overgrown fields and some forested areas. We walked up this hill at the end of the road, and there was a bunch of abandoned buildings there. I remember I had read the story of that place, but I forget the particulars now. There was an old farmhouse and a building that had been used for a schoolhouse. There were also some barns and stables and other outbuildings. Apparently, the place had been abandoned a long time ago, like in the early 1900s. I was in front of the old house and I could see the spot where the old road left the forest and entered the fields. It was about 500 yards away, and I wanted to head to the clearing. I had a feeling it was a good place to spot pheasants, which were supposed to be plentiful in the area. It was a typical winter day, cold and overcast. I had my shotgun and bag, and Barney and I looked around the abandoned buildings for a while first. I didn't sense anything unusual. We found a place where we could lay low and observe any wildlife that showed up. We were there waiting for several hours, but didn't get much. And then just before dark, Barney and I packed up and started heading back to the truck. My dog was usually as easygoing and docile as any dog that ever lived. I had hardly ever heard him growl or seen him raise his hackles until that day. We climbed back up the hill to the old buildings to get to the road out, and when we got near the farmhouse, Barney started to act strange. He wouldn't walk in front of me like he usually did. He kept walking against my legs and would stop and make me almost fall over him. I spoke to him sternly and tried to get him to stay out from underfoot. We kept walking past all of the old buildings. When we had gone a little further, he began to stop and look back down the road toward the buildings. I would call him and he would catch up with me, but then he would stop again and stare back down the road. It was very slow going. And then he started to do this almost constant low growl. It wasn't a growl that I'd ever heard him do before. It honestly made all my hair stand on end. So I started walking faster, but he kept stopping and growling. I tried to coax him to keep up with me. I was looking back, but I couldn't see anything unusual. But I was really starting to feel nervous by the way he was acting. Finally, we reached the edge of the field just past the buildings, and I could see he had all of the hair on his back and shoulders standing on end. We proceeded to head back along the road toward the trees again, and I thought we were on our way, but then Barney turned around and bolted toward the closest shed. He was barking like crazy, and to my horror, I saw something emerge out of the doorway. Whatever it was so tall that it had to bend down to come out. I was then screaming at the top of my lungs for my dog to stop, but he kept going until he was about 20 feet in front of that thing, and he was just going ballistic. The thing looked like something out of a nightmare. Its face was wolf-like, but it had the most sinister expression on it, and the eyes seemed to have this red glow, and it was glaring at my dog like it was going to murder him. Its chest was huge, and its legs seemed canine. And then it started charging towards my dog, and I raised my shotgun and I got off a shot. It stopped the thing in its tracks, and then it turned and ran behind the building. I got to Barney and I grabbed his collar and dragged him away. I was so freaking mad at him for not listening to me, and I was screaming every obscenity at him, trying to get him to snap out of it and come with me. When I was close to that shed, I then smelled the foulest stench of rotten garbage that you can imagine. Finally, my freaking dog started running toward the trees with me, and we got the heck out of there. I'm not sure if my shot grazed that thing or not, but I heard this horrible howling sound as we were running away. We ran most of the 2 miles back to the truck, and by the time we were driving away, the dog and I looked like we had both just been to hell and back. Before that day, I never would have believed such a thing existed. If it hadn't been for the dog's reaction, I would not have even known that that thing was there. Who knows if it would have attacked me or Barney if I hadn't had that warning. In any case, we never went back to that spot again. That experience really makes me wonder what exists in those out-of-the-way places where not many other people go. Like, what lives out there? I tend to stick with the more populated areas since then, and I'm a lot more likely to use a leash these days. At the time this happened, I was working as a local journalist in my hometown of Troy, Michigan. In 2014, the editorial team asked me to follow a story from Detroit. Normally, I would jump on an opportunity to head out, but that time I had a strange feeling about it. Part of it was due to my uneasiness driving after my shoulder surgery, and partly due to knowing that Route 75 is said to be a paranormal magnet. I was pacing outside my boss's office thinking of an excuse to not go, and I noticed my coworker Frank was packing up his desk. I remembered that he was moving to another job outside of Troy, and that meant that my chance for a promotion was maybe finally here. So with that in mind, I decided to swallow my anxiousness and take on the story. I called my dad and asked if I could take his car. Young journalists are not paid enough to own one that's reliable yet. Detroit? Well, I can come along, and we can stop at your Uncle Sean's place, my dad said. I cringed from the inside, but agreed. He and I don't have much in common. I'm timid and antisocial, and he's outspoken and loud. However, I really wanted the Detroit story to help me with the promotion, and the road trip would probably mean a lot to him, too. Neither of us had any commitment after work, so we headed out right afterwards, straight down Route 75. He tried to churn up some conversation, but I was tired and I wanted to be fully awake the next morning. So I started to nod off in the car. Detroit is not too far from Troy, but every second felt like an hour. I do not remember when I actually fell asleep, probably when Dad started telling stories of a strange creature that had been seen lurking near Troy. Maybe I should have been paying attention. A little ways into the trip, I heard a loud thud, and I jumped and hit my head on the car window that I was leaning against. "Hey, are you up?" my dad said. "I think I saw something." Probably it was nothing, he whispered. I shook my head no and just answered in murmurs. It was dark at this point and we were no longer on 75. I remember making frustrated remarks, but his attention was completely somewhere else. His hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly, too. You were asleep. There was an accident on 75. I knew a way to bypass it over here by the fairgrounds and the cemetery. Well, I thought I did, but I think we're lost. I rolled my eyes as I reached into my pockets to open the map on my phone. I tried to unlock my phone, but realized it was completely dead. I was so fixated on reaching Detroit that it had slipped my mind to charge it before leaving. The car kept moving along, but then it seemed to slow down. I opened my eyes wider, and I turned towards my dad to see his eyes wide open and staring in the rearview mirror. I still remember the look on his face, with his jaw hanging down. He kept driving slowly, but his eyes were glued to the rearview mirror. Not knowing what was going on, I asked him to let me drive. But my dad kept acting strange and not stopping. I asked him again to stop the car and switch seats with me. He was hesitant at first, but he finally agreed. I got out of the car, and soon after getting out, a noise from off in the direction of the cemetery caught my attention. I was looking around to find the source. I scanned the horizon looking for whatever it was, and what I saw was nothing like I could have ever imagined. It was a dark-haired, furry, wolf-looking creature, but it was huge, as big as a fully grown horse, I would say. I squinted my eyes, thinking it was a play of the light, but the bright yellow eyes that were staring back into mine were definitely real. Even though the creature was at least a few 100 feet away from us, its incredible size was clearly noticeable. Its presence behind our car, looking towards us, was something I could feel even that far away. I'll never forget the feeling I had when it first looked at us. It was majestic, and it had a sense of undeniable power. I felt it could make anybody feel shivers down their spine and make their hands quiver, just like I was feeling at that moment. However, I am a journalist, so I decided I could capture this beast with my camera and show people what I saw. I slowly moved my hand, reaching for the door handle while also reaching for my camera. In my head, I was moving slowly enough that I wouldn't be noticed by the creature who was still a decent distance away. Unluckily for me, I was wrong. The beast howled a cry at the most unbelievable spectrum, and it rose up on its two back feet. Its muscled body was now maybe 9 feet tall, and its dark fur made it seem even more ominous and horrifying. However, the strangest part of this vision was the creature's human-like build. The only typical wolf features were the tail, the sharp set of paws, and the end of each limb and the snarling wolf head. By this point, my dad had jumped inside the car to the passenger seat, and I had moved across to the driver's side. He quickly helped me to open the driver's door and yanked me inside and yelled to hit the accelerator. At first, I was in shock, but he pushed my knee and he slapped me to my senses. I then shut the door and pressed the pedal to its limit without even looking back into the rearview mirror. My hands were gripping the steering wheel white-knuckled, and they were still shaking as I drove away and tried to process what had just happened during those past 1 to 2 longest minutes of my life. My father saw it too, and he knew what he saw, but he could not verbally acknowledge it. But as far as I'm concerned, I hope it is the first and the last time I see the notorious Dogman of Michigan.